Have you ever felt the cold sting of being replaced? The humiliation of hearing the person you once loved, the person you built a life with, boast about how much better, how much more beautiful their new life is without you? For Elina Voss, this wasn't just a fear, it was happening right now in a ballroom filled with faces from her past. Her ex-husband Mark was holding court, painting a masterpiece of her replacement's perfection. He thought he had won. He thought she was broken. What he didn't know was that Elina wasn't arriving broken. She was arriving with a man whose name could bring titans of industry to a standstill, a man who didn't just see her worth. He treasured it. Get ready for a story of calmer self-love and the most satisfying entrance of all time. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between a utility bill and a catalogue for minimalist furniture. It was printed on thick cream-coloured cardstock, the kind that felt important, even before you read the words. The embossed crest of Northwood University gleamed under the recessed lighting of Elina Voss's home office. You are cordially invited to the 10-year reunion of the class of 2015. Elina ran a thumb over the raised lettering. 10 years. It felt like a lifetime ago, and simultaneously like yesterday. 10 years since she'd walked across that stage diploma in hand. Mark Peterson's arm wrapped securely around her waist. Back then, he was her entire world. They were the golden couple, the ones everyone expected to succeed. And they had for a time. They'd gotten married a year after graduation, bought a starter home in the suburbs, and fallen into a rhythm that from the outside looked like the American dream. But dreams can curdle. The reality had been far different. Mark's ambition wasn't about building a life together. It was about building a fest. He craved the appearance of success. The right car, the right neighborhood, the right wife. Elina, with her quiet intelligence and fierce loyalty, had been the perfect supportive wife. She'd put her own career ambitions on hold, a fledgling graphic design business to help him climb the corporate ladder at a mid-tier investment firm. She hosted his dinner parties, proofread his reports, and soothed his ego after every perceived slight at work. The cracks started small. A dismissive comment about her little hobby, a preference for her to wear certain clothes that better reflected his station, the slow creeping realization that she wasn't his partner, she was his prettiest, most useful accessory. The final break came 3 years ago, a brutal, soul-crushing split. He'd called her unambitious, stagnant, and in a moment of pure cruelty, plain. He said he needed a woman who inspired him, someone who shined. 2 months later, he was with Tiffany. Elina knew of her only through the carefully curated lens of social media. Tiffany Sterling was by all accounts a goddess, a 20-something Instagram model with cascading blonde hair, impossibly blue eyes, and a body that defied nature. Her entire existence seemed to be a series of sun-drenched beaches, exclusive rooftop bars, and designer outfits. She was everything Mark had ever wanted in an accessory, shiny new and universally admired for her surface beauty. You're not actually thinking of going, are you? Elina looked up from the invitation. Her best friend and business partner, Chloe, was leaning against the doorframe of the office, holding 2 mugs of coffee. Chloe's sharp, no-nonsense attitude had been the anchor that kept Elina from drowning during the divorce. I don't know. Elina sighed, tossing the card onto her sleek, expansive desk. The desk, the office, the entire thriving business, Voss Creative, a boutique marketing agency that was now the go-to firm for luxury artisan brands, was a testament to how far she'd come. She wasn't that unambitious woman anymore. She had built this from the ashes of her old life. Ellie, why would you put yourself through that? It's a tank of sharks, and you know who the apex predator will be. Mark will be there, preening like a peacock with his child bride. He will make it his personal mission to humiliate you. He can't humiliate me, Elina said, though her voice lacked conviction. I'm not that person anymore. Logically, you know that. But emotionally, hearing him talk, seeing them together, it's a wound, Ellie. Why poke it? Chloe set a mug down in front of her. You're happy. Your business is killing it. You're with a man who worships the ground you walk on. You have nothing to prove. Ah, yes, the man. If Mark's new life was a public spectacle, Elina's was a private sanctuary. About a year ago, through a client introduction, she had met Julian Devereux. On paper, he was a terrifyingly impressive figure. The self-made CEO and founder of Aethelred Holdings, a multi-billion-dollar tech and private equity firm. He was a visionary, a name whispered with reverence in boardrooms across the globe. In person, he was just Julian. He was quiet where Mark was loud. He listened more than he spoke. He had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and a deep, soothing voice that could calm the most frantic of her anxieties. He wasn't attracted to the version of Elina she thought a man like him would want. He was fascinated by her mind, her creativity, her resilience. He would spend hours in her studio, watching her work, utterly captivated. He loved the way she fiercely negotiated a contract, the way she could distill a brand's entire essence into a single image. He loved her without makeup in her old paint-stained sweatshirt. He loved her, not the idea of her. Their relationship was the one thing she kept fiercely private. In a world of oversharing, it was hers. No social media posts, no red carpet events, unless absolutely necessary. The press knew he was in a relationship, but the identity of the woman was a closely guarded secret. It was a stark contrast to Mark, whose Instagram was a shrine to his relationship with Tiffany. Later that evening, curled up on the sofa in the living room of Julian's stunning penthouse overlooking Central Park, the invitation lay on the coffee table between them. Rain pattered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights blurring into a watercolor painting. Julian picked up the card, his long fingers tracing the crest. He was dressed in a simple grey cashmere sweater and dark trousers, the picture of understated elegance. Northwood. That's where you studied, isn't it? Mm-hmm, Elina murmured, leaning her head against his shoulder. A decade ago. He read the details, his expression neutral. Are you going? Chloe thinks it's a terrible idea. A tank of sharks was her exact phrase. And what do you think? He asked, his voice a low rumble. Elena hesitated. I think a part of me doesn't want to go because I'm scared. Scared of seeing him. Scared of how it will feel. And I hate that. I hate that after all this time, after everything I've built, he still has that tiny sliver of power over me. Julian was silent for a moment, processing her words. He didn't offer platitudes or easy reassurances. He simply understood. Then you should go, he said finally. Elina looked up at him, surprised. Really? You think so? Yes, he said, turning to face her fully, his gaze intense and unwavering. You aren't the woman you were 3 years ago. Elina, you aren't even the woman you were 3 months ago. You are the founder and creative director of one of the most respected agencies in your field. You are brilliant, you are strong, and you are the most captivating woman I have ever known. You are not going there for him. You are going there for yourself, to show that timid girl from 10 years ago who she was always meant to become. He paused, a gentle smile playing on his lips. And besides, I haven't been to a university reunion before. It might be fun. Wait, you'd come with me. The thought hadn't even occurred to her. Julian Devereux at her college reunion. It seemed surreal. Of course, he said as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. I have a board meeting in Geneva that week, but I can fly back on Saturday. I'll be your date. He then added, with a twinkle in his eye, though I may have to rent a tuxedo that doesn't look like it costs more than the university's endowment. I want to make a good impression. Elena laughed, a genuine, bubbling sound of relief and affection. The fear that had been coiled in her stomach began to loosen. Maybe Chloe was wrong. Maybe this wasn't about poking an old wound. Maybe it was about finally definitively letting it heal. With Julian by her side, the tank of sharks seemed a lot less intimidating. It was just a party after all. A party where she could finally close a chapter of her life, not with bitterness, but with the quiet, unshakable confidence of a woman who knew her own worth. She picked up her phone and RSVP'd. Elina Voss, Place au 1. The Grand Astoria Hotel ballroom was a symphony of gold and crystal. Chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, casting a warm, buttery glow over the 200 or so people milling about. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, the murmur of forced laughter, and the clinking of champagne flutes. It was exactly as pretentious as Elina remembered college functions, being only now everyone was older, carrying the subtle and sometimes not so subtle weight of a decade in the real world. Elina had arrived alone. Julian's flight from Geneva had been slightly delayed, but he'd messaged her, promising to be there within the hour. Make a grand entrance without me. He'd texted, followed by a winking emoji. Stun them all. I'll be there to pick up the pieces. She'd chosen her armor carefully, a sophisticated, deep sapphire cocktail dress that was elegant rather than flashy. It highlighted her figure without screaming for attention. Her hair was styled in soft waves, and her makeup was understated. She didn't want to look like she was trying too hard. She just wanted to look like herself, but the best version of it. For the first 20 minutes, it was manageable. She exchanged pleasantries with a few familiar faces, people who knew her as Elina, not Mark's ex-wife. They complimented her on her business, having seen a recent feature in a design magazine. It was pleasant, civilized, and then she saw him. Mark Peterson hadn't just entered the room, he'd made an entrance. He was positioned near the main bar, the strategic center of the room's social gravity. He was louder than she remembered his laughter, a booming performance. He wore a suit that was just a little too tight, a watch that was just a little too big. He was surrounded by a small group of their old university friends, mostly the jocks and business track guys he used to run with. And clinging to his arm was Tiffany. In person, she was even more striking than her photos. Impossibly tall, with a mane of platinum blonde hair that seemed to catch every shard of light from the chandeliers. She was poured into a glittering, backless gold dress that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. She looked less like a person and more like a concept, the physical embodiment of male fantasy. She smiled and nodded as Mark spoke, but her eyes had a slightly vacant quality, as if she were posing for a photo no one was taking. Elina instinctively moved behind a large floral arrangement, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. Chloe's voice echoed in her head, a tank of sharks. She couldn't hear the exact words, but she could see the pantomime. Mark was holding court. He would say something, then gesture expansively toward Tiffany, who would offer a dazzling, practiced smile. The men around him would chuckle and nod appreciatively, their eyes flicking over Tiffany like they were appraising a sports car. Driven by a morbid curiosity she couldn't suppress, Elina edged closer, pretending to be examining the canapes on a nearby table. Now she could hear him. And honestly, guys, it's just on another level, Mark was saying, his voice oozing with smug satisfaction. He took a loud sip of his champagne. I mean, you know how it is. You think you're happy. You think you've got it good. But then you meet someone like Tiff and you realize what you've been missing. It's like going from a black and white TV to 8K Ultra HD. A few of the men chuckled uncomfortably. One of them, a guy named Kevin, glanced nervously in Alina's direction, but she quickly looked down at a plate of miniature quiches. She's a stunner, Mark. For sure, another man, David, chimed in. Stunner, Mark scoffed, draping his arm more firmly around Tiffany's waist. That's an understatement. Look at her. She's perfect. And the best part, no baggage, no drama, just pure sunshine. He lowered his voice conspiratorially, but it was still loud enough for Elina to hear every venomous word. My life with Elina? God, it was so beige. Everything was a negotiation, a chore. She was always so serious, so focused on her little projects. I needed someone who inspires me to live, you know, someone with real beauty inside and out. He squeezed Tiffany's side. Tell them what you were shooting last week, babe. Tiffany smiled vaguely. Oh, just a swimwear campaign in the Maldives. It was nice. Nice. It was incredible, Mark boomed. They flew her first class. The resort was insane. That's the kind of life we're living now. No limits. Each word was a perfectly aimed dart, and despite her best efforts, Elina felt them land. Beige. Serious. Little projects. He was deliberately, cruelly rewriting their history, painting her as a drab, ambitionless ball and chain he had heroically unshackled himself from. The little project he was dismissing was the very business that afforded her a life he could only dream of. The seriousness he mocked was the focus and determination that had made her a success. She felt a hot flush of shame and anger creep up her neck. It was so much worse than she had imagined. He wasn't just boasting about his new fiancée. He was using that boast as a weapon to retroactively diminish Elina's entire existence. He was performing for an audience trying to solidify his narrative. I won. I upgraded. My life is better because she is no longer in it. She saw Kevin catch her eye again, this time with a look of genuine pity. That was almost worse. She didn't want pity. She wanted to be invisible. She wanted the marble floor to swallow her whole. She wanted Julian to be there, not to fight her battles, but just to stand beside her, a silent testament that Mark's version of reality was not the truth. Tiffany, for her part, seemed faintly uncomfortable with the specifics of Mark's monologue. When he'd called Elina beige, a flicker of something, empathy, awkwardness crossed her face, before being replaced by her default placid smile. She was a prop in his one-man show, and it seemed like she was only just beginning to realize it. Anyway, Mark concluded, raising his glass. To new beginnings, and to finding a woman who actually looks good in a bikini. The laughter from the group was strained this time. The cruelty was too overt, too pathetic. Mark seemed to sense he'd gone too far and tried to pivot. So Dave, how's the new job at Barclays treating you? Elina couldn't listen anymore. She turned and walked away, her movements stiff. She headed for the terrace doors, needing fresh air, needing to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the ballroom. Her hands were trembling. Her carefully constructed confidence felt like it was crumbling into dust. He had done it. He had managed to humiliate her. For a fleeting, painful moment, she felt small again. She felt beige. She pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped out into the cool night air, leaning against the stone balustrade. The city hummed below, oblivious. She took a deep, shaky breath, fighting back the tears that pricked at the corners of her eyes. She would not cry. She would not give him that satisfaction. She just needed a moment to reassemble her armor. She was staring out at the skyline when a warm, familiar hand gently touched her back. Everything all right, my love? She turned, and all the air left her lungs. It was Julian. He was here. He looked impossibly handsome in a perfectly tailored dark navy tuxedo. His white shirt crisp, a simple black bow tie at his neck. He wasn't wearing the flashiest suit or the biggest watch. He didn't need to. He radiated a quiet, unshakable confidence that made Mark's performative arrogance look like a child's tantrum. His brow was furrowed with concern as he took in her expression. What happened? He asked, his voice low and gentle. Elina opened her mouth to speak, but all that came out was a choked sob she could no longer contain. Julian immediately wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into a firm, safe embrace. He didn't say anything, just held her, stroking her hair as she buried her face in his chest, the scent of his cologne sandalwood and bergamot, a comforting anchor in the storm of her emotions. He's an idiot, Elina. Julian murmured into her hair after a moment. A small, insecure man. Whatever he said has no reflection on you. It is a reflection of his own inadequacy. She pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes. How did you know he said something? A wry, knowing smile touched Julian's lips. I saw his performance on my way in. The loud laughing, the grand gestures. Men like that are a caricature. They only broadcast their insecurities so loudly when they feel threatened. He gently brushed a stray tear from her cheek with his thumb. Are you ready to go back in? I don't know, she whispered. I feel so foolish. You have nothing to feel foolish about, he said, his voice firm but kind. He offered her his arm. Let's go back in. We won't be staying long. We'll have one drink. You will hold your head high, and we will let them see the magnificent woman I have the honor of being with. Not for them, for you. Elina looked at him, at this incredible, kind, perceptive man who saw all of her and cherished it. She took a deep breath, the cool air steadying her nerves. She nodded, a new resolve hardening within her. He was right. This wasn't about Mark anymore. This was about her. She took his arm. Okay, she said, her voice stronger now. Let's go have that drink. Together they turned and walked back toward the ballroom doors. They weren't just going back to a party. They were walking into the lion's den. But this time, Elina wasn't alone. And she wasn't prey. The transition from the relative quiet of the terrace to the cacophony of the ballroom was jarring. But this time, Elina didn't flinch. Julian's arm was a steady, solid presence linked with hers. His warmth seemed to radiate through her, a shield against the judging eyes and whispered conversations. As they stepped through the doors, she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. The effect of their entrance was not immediate and explosive, but a slow rolling wave of realization that washed across the room. It started with a woman near the door, a former sorority sister named Jessica, whose eyes widened almost comically. She recognized Elina first, then her gaze shifted to the man beside her. A flicker of confusion crossed her face, then dawning recognition. Jessica grabbed her husband's arm, whispering urgently. He followed her gaze and his jaw went slack. This small ripple spread outwards. Heads began to turn. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. The general hum of the room dipped in volume as more and more people noticed the couple who had just entered. It wasn't just that Elina was with a handsome, impeccably dressed man. It was the man himself. Julian Devereux was not a celebrity in the traditional sense, but in the circles of finance, tech, and high society circles that many in this room aspired to, he was a legend. His face wasn't on tabloid covers, but it was on the cover of Forbes, The Economist, and the Wall Street Journal. He was a man who moved markets with a single press release, whose company, Aethelred Holdings, was a behemoth that acquired and reshaped entire industries. Whispers started to fly quickly, morphing from, "Who is that with Elina Voss?" to, "Is that? No, it can't be," to, "Oh my God, that's Julian Devereux." The entire social dynamic of the room began to pivot like a compass needle, swinging violently towards a new magnetic north. The center of gravity was no longer the bar where Mark Peterson was holding court. It was now the couple standing serenely by the entrance. Unaware, or perhaps simply unconcerned by the stir they were causing, Julian guided Elina toward a less crowded corner of the room. "Can I get you some champagne?" he asked, softly, his focus entirely on her. "Yes, please," she murmured, a small, genuine smile finally reaching her lips. The looks on people's faces were a potent antidote to the humiliation she had felt just minutes before. It wasn't about the status or the money, but about the sheer undeniable proof that Mark's narrative about her was a pathetic lie. As Julian made his way to the bar, the crowd parted for him, with a deference they hadn't shown anyone else all night. Elina watched as people, who had barely given her a second glance earlier, now shot her looks of awe, curiosity, and envy. From across the room, Mark had noticed the shift. He stopped mid-sentence, his story about Dave's job at Barclays forgotten. He saw the heads turning the whispering, and he followed their collective gaze. He saw Elina, and then he saw the man walking away from her toward the bar. His first reaction was a sneer. So she brought a date, he thought. Probably some artsy guy from her little company. He watched as the man, tall and poised, effortlessly procured 2 glasses of champagne, nodding politely to the bartender. Mark squinted, a flicker of unease in his gut. There was something familiar about him, but he couldn't place it. Tiffany, sensing his attention had shifted, turned as well. "Who's that?" she asked, her voice neutral. "Looks like my ex finally scraped a date together," Mark said dismissively, though his eyes remained fixed on the scene. "Probably trying to make me jealous. It's a bit sad, really." But the people around Mark weren't listening to him anymore. They were all looking at the same thing. Holy crap. Kevin, the friend who had looked at Elina with pity, breathed out. "Is that who I think it is?" "Who?" Mark asked, his irritation growing. "Devereux." Another man, a portfolio manager named Scott, whispered, his voice tinged with reverence. "Julian Devereux, of Aethelred Holdings." The name hit Mark like a physical blow. He felt the blood drain from his face. Julian Devereux. The Julian Devereux. It was impossible. He was one of the most powerful men in the world. What would a man like that be doing here at a Northwood University reunion? And with Elina, Mark's mind raced, trying to compute the information. His firm, Stratford and Finch, had been desperately trying to get a meeting with Aethelred's acquisitions department for 6 months. They were a minnow trying to get the attention of a blue whale. Mark had sat in on meetings where his managing director spoke of Devereux as if he were a mythical creature, a king from a distant land, and he was here, with his beige ex-wife. Julian returned to Elina's side, handing her a flute of champagne. He leaned in and murmured something in her ear, and she laughed, a real vibrant laugh that lit up her entire face. It was a look of pure, unadulterated happiness. A look Mark hadn't seen on her face in years, and one he now realized, with a sickening jolt, he had never truly been able to inspire. The sight of them together was jarring. They looked right. Elina's sapphire dress complemented Julian's navy tuxedo. Her quiet grace was a perfect match for his commanding stillness. They weren't a mismatched couple thrown together for an event. They looked like a power couple, but a power couple at ease in their own private world amidst the chaos of the party. The narrative Mark had so carefully constructed, the one where he had upgraded to a life of sunshine and beauty, lay in smoking ruins at his feet. In the space of 5 minutes, he had gone from being the center of attention to a footnote. His loud boasts now echoed in his own mind, sounding pathetic and hollow. Bragging about a first-class flight to the Maldives in front of a man who likely owned the jet, and possibly the island was a new level of social suicide. Tiffany watched the color drain from Mark's face. She followed his stunned gaze back to Elina and the man beside her. She didn't know the name Julian Devereux, but she was an expert in reading social cues. She understood power dynamics, influence, and status. She could see the deference in the way people looked at him. She could feel the magnetic pull he exerted on the room without even trying, and she could see the way he looked at Elina, not like a trophy to be shown off, but like a treasure to be cherished. It was a look she had always craved from Mark, but had never received. "Mark," she asked, her voice small, "who is that man?" Mark swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. He couldn't tear his eyes away from Elina and Julian. He saw them clink their glasses together, a private, intimate toast. His world, which had felt so shiny and impressive just moments ago, now felt cheap, flimsy, and fake. "Nobody," he choked out, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. "He's nobody." But it was too late. The truth was already loose in the room, and it was heading directly for him. For a few minutes, an invisible barrier seemed to exist around Elina and Julian. People looked, whispered, and pointed, but no one dared to approach. It was as if they were encased in an aura of untouchable prestige. Elina, sipping her champagne, felt a strange sense of calm. The power in the room had shifted so completely that she was no longer a participant in the drama, but an observer. The first person to breach the barrier was an old professor, Dr. Albright, a man Elina had always admired. He approached them, not with the fawning curiosity of the others, but with genuine warmth. Elina Voss, I was so pleased to read about your agency's success, he said, his eyes twinkling. I always knew that sharp mind of yours was destined for more than just lecture halls. Dr. Albright, it's so good to see you, Elina, said, her smile genuine. This is my fiancé, Julian. A pleasure, Julian said, shaking the professor's hand firmly. Elina has spoken very highly of your mentorship. The use of the word fiancé was deliberate. They'd gotten engaged quietly a month ago, sharing the news only with their closest circle. Announcing it here and now felt right. It wasn't a strategic move, but a simple statement of fact that in this context carried the weight of a royal decree. The word hung in the air, and Elina could almost feel the shockwave it sent through the nearby listeners. As Dr. Albright moved on, the spell was broken. A few other brave souls, former classmates, who now worked in finance and tech, and recognized the immense networking opportunity, approached their introductions to Julian fawning and sycophantic. Julian was polite but brief, his attention always returning to Elina, making it clear that he was here with her, not as a guest of an honor to be courted. And then Mark approached. He moved toward them, like a man walking to his own execution. His earlier swagger was gone, replaced by a stiff, awkward gait. Tiffany trailed a few steps behind him, her expression a mixture of apprehension and morbid curiosity. The small crowd around Mark had abandoned him, leaving him isolated. He had no choice but to confront the new center of the universe. Elina. He said, his voice strained. He tried for a casual tone, but it came out tight and unnatural. Fancy seeing you here, Mark. Elina replied, her voice even and cool. She didn't offer a smile. She simply acknowledged him. She was no longer intimidated. Looking at him now, she saw him for what he was, a man terrified of being seen as small. Mark's eyes darted from Elina to Julian, a flicker of disbelief still warring with the horrifying reality. He gestured awkwardly toward Tiffany. You've met my fiancée, Tiffany, he said the word fiancé, now sounding like a pathetic echo of Elina's. Tiffany offered a small, hesitant wave. It's a pleasure, Julian said, his voice smooth as silk. His gaze was polite, but his eyes were extraordinarily perceptive. It was the kind of look that made people feel like he was seeing right through them to the very core of their intentions. And this is, Elina began, but Mark cut her off, extending a hand to Julian with forced bravado. Mark Peterson, Stratford and Finch, he said, name-dropping his firm as if it held any weight in this context. Good to meet you. Didn't catch your name. It was a desperate last-ditch attempt to pretend he didn't know who Julian was, to reclaim some semblance of control. Julian took his hand. His grip was firm, effortless. Julian Devereux, he said, his tone neutral. He didn't add his company name. He didn't have to. The confirmation of the name spoken aloud seemed to suck the air out of Mark's lungs. His face, already pale, went ashen. He had been holding onto a sliver of hope that everyone was mistaken. That hope was now gone. Devereux. Mark repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Of course, Aethelred Holdings. We at Stratford and Finch are huge admirers of your work. Huge admirers. His sycophantic fawning was a stark, humiliating contrast to his earlier boasts. Julian gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, his expression unreadable. I'm glad our work is appreciated. An excruciatingly awkward silence fell over the small group. Mark's mind was a frantic mess. This was the man his company had been chasing for months. He had just spent the last half hour indirectly and directly insulting the man's fiancée. The fiancée, who was also his own ex-wife. The potential for professional and personal fallout was catastrophic. He had to say something. He had to fix it. So Mark began turning to Elina with a wide, fake smile. This is a surprise. You and Mr. Devereux. How did you two even meet? The question was laced with an unspoken insinuation. How did someone like you land someone like him? Before Elina could answer, Julian did his voice calm and deliberate, each word chosen with surgical precision. I was fortunate enough to be introduced to Elina through a business associate. I was looking for a marketing firm to rebrand a heritage luxury brand my company had recently acquired. I was told Voss Creative was the best in the business. After meeting Elina and seeing her portfolio, I concluded that was an understatement. He turned his gaze to Elina, and the cool politeness he'd shown Mark melted away, replaced by genuine warmth and admiration. Her insight into brand narrative is extraordinary. She possesses a rare combination of artistic creativity and strategic acumen. She's a formidable talent. The compliment was so specific, so professional, and so glowing that it served as a devastating rebuttal to Mark's earlier dismissal of her little projects. He hadn't just praised her, he had endorsed her professional genius in front of the man who had called her unambitious. Mark looked like he'd been punched in the gut. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. What could he possibly say? Tiffany was watching this exchange with wide, intelligent eyes. She wasn't just a beautiful face. She was seeing the entire dynamic laid bare. She saw the way Julian spoke of Elina with a deep, authentic respect that Mark had never once shown her. Mark praised her body, her face, her ability to look good in a photo. Julian praised Elina's mind, her talent, her work. In that moment, Tiffany saw the vast, cavernous difference between being a trophy and being a partner. And she saw with dawning horror that Mark had positioned her firmly as the former. Trying to salvage the train wreck, Mark cleared his throat and made one last fatal error. He turned to Julian man to man as if trying to find common ground. "Well, you know how it is," he said, with a weak, conspiratorial chuckle. "It's important to have a partner who complements your lifestyle. My Tiff here. She's a breath of fresh air. Keeps things light, you know. No heavy business talk at home." It was meant to be a subtle dig at Elina, a final attempt to frame her as the serious and beige one. But it backfired spectacularly. Julian's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. A chill entered his voice. On the contrary, Mr. Peterson, he said, his tone dropping to a level of quiet intensity that was more intimidating than any shout. "I find a partner who can challenge me intellectually to be the greatest asset in my life. The conversations Elina and I have about her business, about my business, about the world, they are the highlight of my day. A beautiful mind is a far rarer and more valuable commodity than a beautiful face, though I'm fortunate enough to have a fiancé who possesses both in abundance." He delivered the final line while looking directly at Elina with a loving smile, completely dismissing Tiffany, not out of malice toward her, but to utterly invalidate Mark's shallow comparison. It was a kill shot. In one smooth, devastating monologue, Julian had championed Elina's intellect, validated her career, announced their engagement, and exposed Mark's values as laughably superficial. Mark stood there, speechless and broken. He had been so obsessed with winning the narrative of their divorce, so desperate to prove he had upgraded, that he had walked blindly into his own public execution. The king of his small imaginary castle had just been effortlessly dethroned by a true emperor who had shown up simply to support the woman he loved. Elina felt a final cleansing wave of release. All the lingering pain, the sting of his past words, the residue of his cruelty, it all vanished. She wasn't happy because he was humiliated. She was happy because she was free. His opinion no longer mattered. His words had no power. He was just a ghost from a past life, and she was very much living in the present. "If you'll excuse us," Julian said smoothly, placing a guiding hand on the small of Elina's back. "I believe we promised some old friends a dance." He guided her away, leaving Mark standing in the middle of the room with Tiffany, the silence between them as vast and cold as the Arctic. The show was over, and everyone knew who had taken the final bow. As Julian led Elina toward the dance floor, it felt as though they were moving through water. The crowd parted, and the whispers followed them, no longer just about Julian's identity, but about the brutal, elegant dismantling of Mark Peterson that had just occurred. Elina felt light, almost giddy. The band was playing a slow classic Sinatra tune. Julian took her in his arms, his hand resting gently on her waist, the other holding hers. They moved together effortlessly, two people perfectly in sync. "Are you okay?" he murmured, his lips close to her ear, his voice for her alone. "I'm better than okay," she whispered back, resting her head on his shoulder. "I feel clear. For the first time. Thank you." "I didn't do anything," he said. "I just told the truth. His reaction is his own to deal with. You did everything she insisted. You showed me the truth, that my value isn't something he gets to define." They danced in comfortable silence for a while, the chaos of the room fading into a pleasant blur. The night was no longer about Mark or the reunion. It was about them. It was a celebration of the life she had built, and the man who had entered it, not as a savior, but as a partner who saw her for exactly who she was. Across the room, the scene was far less serene. Mark and Tiffany were still standing in the same spot, frozen in a tableau of humiliation. The space around them felt toxic, and no one approached. Finally, Tiffany turned to him, her face a mask of cold fury. "Don't you ever," she said, her voice low and trembling, "ever use me as a prop like that again." "Tiff, baby, I don't know what you're talking about," Mark stammered, trying to take her arm. She snatched it away. "Don't you dare. Keeps things light. No heavy business talk. You made me sound like an idiot, like a beautiful, brainless doll you keep around for decoration. You weren't complimenting me, Mark. You were using my appearance to insult your ex-wife, and you ended up humiliating us both. I was just trying to... To what? Win, she shot back, her blue eyes flashing with an intelligence he had never bothered to look for. Look around. Do you think you won that man, that Julian Devereux? He didn't even have to raise his voice. He destroyed you with a compliment to her. He respects her mind, her work. What do you respect about me, Mark? My waist-to-hip ratio. The way I look in a bikini. The words he had used so cruelly against Elina were now being thrown back in his face. He stared at her, dumbfounded. He had never seen this side of her. He had chosen her because he thought she was simple, uncomplicated. He was discovering far too late that there was a sharp, perceptive mind behind the perfect face, a mind that was now pointed directly at him. "That's not fair," he mumbled. "Isn't it?" Tiffany gave a short, bitter laugh. "You wanted a woman who shined. You know what I think? You just wanted a woman who was bright enough to blind people so they wouldn't see how small you really are." Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked away, not toward the exit, but toward a group of women she knew from the industry, leaving Mark utterly alone in the middle of the floor. His reign as the center of attention had lasted all of 30 minutes. Now he was a social pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about over champagne. As Elina and Julian finished their dance, a familiar face approached them. It was Ben Carter, a quiet, kind guy from their literature program, who had become a successful novelist. He'd always been an observer, someone who saw more than he said. "Elina," he said with a warm smile, "it's good to see you looking so happy." "Truly." "Ben, it's great to see you too. This is my fiancé, Julian." They shook hands, and Ben's gaze was one of genuine respect, not awe. "It's an honor, Mr. Devereux. I have to say, that was quite a moment back there. Mark hasn't changed a bit." "You knew him well?" Julian asked, his curiosity piqued. Ben chuckled grimly. "We were roommates for a semester. Let me tell you something. Elina probably never knew. Mark's obsession with appearances. It's not new. His father was exactly the same. Cut him off financially for a year because Mark's first serious girlfriend in college wasn't from the right family. He's been chasing external validation his whole life. His relationships, his job, his car, they're not for him. They're props for a play he's performing for an audience that doesn't even care. Ben looked at Elina kindly. When he got together with you, we all thought he'd finally grown up. You were brilliant, grounded. We thought you'd be the one to make him a real person. But I guess in the end, he couldn't handle being with someone whose light was their own. He needed someone whose light he could control. The revelation settled over Elina, not with a shock, but with a profound sense of clarity. It all made sense. The constant need for praise, the obsession with what the neighbors thought, the way he'd belittled her ambitions once they started to become real. It wasn't about her at all. It was never about her. It was about his own deep-seated generational insecurity. He hadn't fallen out of love with her. He had been terrified by her potential. She felt a strange, unexpected pang of pity for him. Not forgiveness, but a sad, detached understanding of his own gilded cage. "Thank you for telling me that, Ben," she said softly. "You deserve all the happiness in the world, Ellie," he said, using her old nickname. "Looks like you found it." He smiled at them both and moved on, leaving Elina and Julian in their own quiet bubble once more. The final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. The wound wasn't just healed, the scar had vanished. Julian squeezed her hand. Ready to leave, Elina looked across the room one last time. She saw Mark standing alone by the bar, nursing a drink, avoiding eye contact with everyone. She saw Tiffany laughing with her friends, vibrant and alive now that she was out of Mark's shadow. She had come here fearing a confrontation, an emotional battle. She was leaving with something far more valuable: closure. "Yes," she said, turning her back on the ballroom and all its ghosts. "Let's go home." As they walked out of the hotel, leaving the noise and the drama behind them, the cool night air felt clean and new. They didn't speak of Mark again. There was no need. His chapter was over, the book firmly closed. The future, a story they were writing together, was waiting for them. The fallout from the reunion was not loud and explosive, but a series of quiet, definitive shifts. News, especially of the juicy, karmic variety, travels fast. Within days, the story of the showdown at the Astoria had become a piece of gossip whispered in certain social and professional circles in New York. The narrative was always the same. Mark Peterson, the arrogant investment banker, had tried to humiliate his brilliant ex-wife, only to be effortlessly put in his place by her billionaire fiancé, the legendary Julian Devereux. For Mark, the consequences were very real. His managing director at Stratford and Finch, a man named Gerald Crane, got wind of the story through a colleague who had been at the reunion. Crane was apoplectic. "Are you an idiot, Peterson?" Crane had barked at him in a closed-door meeting, his face purple with rage. "We have been trying to get a foot in the door with Aethelred Holdings for the better part of a year. We are currently trying to court an investment from their venture capital arm for the new tech fund. Their CEO is Julian Devereux, and you, in your infinite wisdom, decided it was a good idea to publicly insult his fiancée." "I didn't know it was him," Mark protested weakly. "It doesn't matter." Crane slammed his hand on the desk. "What matters is your complete lack of judgment, discretion, and basic human decency. You not only embarrassed yourself, you made this entire firm look amateurish and foolish. You are a liability." Mark was taken off the tech fund project immediately. He was sidelined, relegated to menial back-office work. The promotion he had been so sure was his was given to someone else. He was professionally neutered, his ladder-climbing ambitions cut off at the knees. The facade of success he had worked so hard to build had been shattered by his own insecurity. Tiffany Sterling did not go back to Mark. The reunion had been a brutally effective wake-up call. She realized she had been so enamored with the idea of the life Mark promised, the glamorous, successful power couple, that she had ignored the glaring reality he didn't see her as a person. 2 days after the reunion, she had her things moved out of his apartment. She posted a single cryptic message on her Instagram story, a picture of a sunrise with the caption, "Never let anyone else's shadow block your sun." Her millions of followers didn't know the context, but for her, it was a declaration of independence. She started taking acting classes using her platform to talk about self-worth beyond aesthetics, and began to build a brand based on something more substantial than just a pretty picture. For Elina, life simply continued, but it was different. A weight she hadn't even fully realized she was carrying had been lifted. The ghost of her past marriage no longer haunted the corners of her mind. A week after the reunion, she and Julian were having breakfast on the sun-drenched terrace of his penthouse. The city was spread out before them, a kingdom of possibilities. The feature story on Voss Creative had led to a flood of new high-profile inquiries. Her business was about to expand in ways she had only dreamed of. She was scrolling through a design brief on her tablet when Julian slid a small velvet box across the table. It was not a ring box. Confused, she looked at him. "This is not a second engagement ring, I promise," he said with a smile. She opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a beautiful custom-made fountain pen. It was crafted from a deep sapphire resin that matched her dress, from the reunion with a solid platinum nib and a simple, elegant clip. Engraved along the side in delicate script were the words, "Scribe of your own story." Tears welled in Elina's eyes. It was the most thoughtful, most perfect gift she had ever received. It wasn't about wealth or status. It was about him seeing her, truly seeing her. He understood that her greatest power, her greatest joy, came from her ability to create, to write narratives for her brands and for herself. "Julian," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You've closed a chapter, Elina," he said softly, reaching across the table to take her hand. "A story someone else tried to write for you. Now you get to write all the rest. And I cannot wait to read every single word." Elina looked from the pen to the face of the man she loved. A man whose strength wasn't in his bank account or his reputation, but in his quiet confidence, his profound kindness, and his unwavering belief in her. She thought of Mark, a man so consumed with crafting a perfect image that he had destroyed his own reality. She thought of Tiffany, a woman finding her own voice after being used as a beautiful mouthpiece. And she thought of herself, the beige woman who had built a world of vibrant color. The woman with little projects, who was now a titan in her own industry. The woman who had walked into a tank of sharks and walked out without a single bite, not because of the powerful man on her arm, but because she had finally completely realized she was not food. She was the ocean. She picked up the pen. It felt balanced perfect in her hand. She smiled, a real radiant smile that held all the promise of a new dawn. The best stories she knew were not about revenge. They were about redemption. And her story was just getting started. And so, Elina's story wasn't about the spectacular fall of her ex-husband, but about her own quiet, magnificent rise. It's a powerful reminder that the ultimate victory isn't about proving your worth to those who doubted you. It's about building a life where their opinion is completely irrelevant. True value isn't loud, boastful, or covered in glitter. It's found in quiet confidence, authentic partnership, and the courage to write your own narrative no matter who tries to edit your pages. Karma, in the end, isn't always a storm. Sometimes it's the peaceful, sunlit morning after you've finally closed the door on the past. What did you think of Elina's journey? Have you ever had a moment where you realized you were finally free from a past hurt? Share your stories and thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life drama and empowering stories. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.